Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Hello and welcome to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson. I've entitled this particular podcast, The Process of Breakups. The breakup thing, it's when a relationship it just ends. But there's a process to it. But in as much as, you're dealing with the emotions of what happens during a breakup, you're also dealing with, a people's past. And what they see for themselves going forward. I mean, it's all kind of, boiled all in there. And for what it means to an individual when you're going through that, I mean, you don't start a relationship with the idea that you're going to break up. See, I mean, what fun is that? But a couple of things I'm going to mention is, in the beginning when you are meeting somebody, I've talked many, many times about relationships and the kind of questions you want to ask. You want to do the interview. You want to treat it like it's an interview. When people talk about their past relationships, they usually talk about the drama, why they left the relationship, because it would help explain why they're looking for somebody new. I mean, you kind of want that information. You kind of want to know that other relationship ended, if you're looking to have a new relationship with them. But here's one of the things in that interview process you want to ask about. How did that relationship end? And was there a lot of drama around it? Are you still friends with that person? Because that can give you an inkling as to, the kind of person you're dealing with. I mean, I don't expect them to be friends, deep friends. I mean, you've had a relationship for a while, things end, you have an understanding that it's not working out. Sometimes people, one person may still want the relationship, the other person may not. And so there's this tug of war, and maybe it spirals down a little bit, and then it picks back up, and then it ends. So you may hear something about that story. And it may have a little bit of drama to it. And I'm not talking about the big knockdown, drag out kinds of drama. That's something that you don't want to bring into your life. So this is kind of why you're asking these types of questions, because you want to get a little bit of the history on a person and how they deal with conflict. And then you have the kind of relationships where the two people sort of mutually agree it's not going where they would like it to go, and they might do well to find other people to be with, separately. And they may still be friends afterwards because maybe they started as friends, they tried it out, and it didn't work out. And, then there's the one where there's a lot of drama involved, and sometimes it gets a little scary and just big blow-ups. But you want to know how people handle those situations, because it gives you information about the person you're dealing with. And again, this is the kind of stuff, hopefully, if you're doing this interview process, and I just describe it that way, because when you're finding out the facts about an individual you might be interested in, you want to know something about their history. You ask about their family, their interests and things like that. I mean, and a lot of us seem to stop there when we find out, well, we have similar interests and we want to share time together and we want to do our similar interests. Like I say, that's all in good, because that's generally where people find the juice in getting to know somebody, because they probably ended a relationship where the person didn't want to do certain things. They just totally separate interests. Maybe the person just wanted to sit around on the couch or wanted to stay at home. They weren't comfortable around crowds, or didn't like the fact that you had certain kinds of friends, or maybe they didn't like your family. All the kind of things that cause people to want to break up or have some anxiety around it. But those being the reasons that they are, when you find a new person and they enjoy going out and being around people and doing the wine tasting or taking trips and stuff, yeah, that's great. So you have that part of the interview process, you know, that works. And again, you want to go a little deeper. And the little deeper part isn't just asking about did you break up, but what that process is like and what you learned about yourself in that process, what you learned about the other person, you know, where did that knowledge take you? And, you know, was it difficult? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. There's no judgment here, but for some people, the breakup process is real difficult, and it just says, you know, some people have a lot of emotions around this, and might find it difficult to process that sometimes. So if they did have challenges with processing it, how did they go through it? Did they just sort of gut it out? Did they go to counseling to help them with learning about themselves, about why the relationship was working for them? And now I'm going to get to the part about the process of breaking up, because all of this is going to lead up to what you experience with them if you have a breakup with them, you see. So I'm sort of setting the stage here, and you want to know something about the person that you're with. And quite often, we don't really get into that part of their history. Most of us tend to ask the questions of, you know, if you're looking to have a monogamous relationship, we tend to ask the question, are they single? And we just might want a little verification, a little proof of that. If they've been married, you want to know if they're divorced. If there wasn't a marriage involved, then, and the relationship was an intimate relationship, did it end? Are you still friends? What sort of ties do you still have? Do you have kids together? Do you have possessions that you both share? Did you have credit card? You know, those kinds of things. Because a lot of those things create bonds that are hard to break. You know, expenses. Did you have a house together? You know, those kinds of things. And when the relationship is, let's say, ended now, and I mean officially, you know, they said, okay, we're not a couple anymore, but you still have those strings. That still makes it a bit of a challenge to know how far they've gotten into the breakup part. Is there a possibility that they may reconnect? And most of us tend to ask questions in that regard. And those are good questions to have answers to. You know, let that person answer them. And once you're satisfied with that, then, you know, you can move on. But the crux of dealing with breaking up really has to do with not only going our separate ways, but how you take care of yourself in that process. And that's the bit of the roller coaster ride that a lot of us will avoid. So sometimes we don't even really want to break up. We don't want to end a relationship because of the emotional roller coaster that we go on. We've all probably been there. If you've been in a relationship of any type, but let's focus on the romantic part because that's really what I'm talking about here. Then it is a roller coaster. It starts at the top and you have that sinking feeling. There could be the fear that the relationship's going to end, and then maybe there might be a bit of a reconciliation. So it goes up the slope and gets to the top, and you have the view, and things seem pretty good again. And then it goes down the slope pretty fast, a little scary. And it does that until the roller coaster stops. And by this analogy, that's when you know the relationship is actually officially over. And somewhere in the process, you find out more about yourself. You might find more reasons to end the relationship because there's more and more discussion about it. And if you were, say, maybe living together and you've chosen to not only, say, stay in separate rooms, but maybe separate locations, then it's really a big indicator that the status of this thing has changed. And probably not looking to reconcile. So that's sort of a template for the connection sort of coming apart, and how each one of us handles that going forward. I think is real critical as to how you're going to take care of yourself, and what to expect in the future. I'm going to take a break, and I'll come right back after this.
The GSMC Sex Podcast is a show that examines all aspects of sexuality, from physical to emotional to spiritual. Join our hosts as they discuss age-old questions, common misconceptions, and the latest topics surrounding sex. They'll tackle topics about sexuality from the complicated to the hilarious and everything in between. GSMC Sex Podcast is your show for all of your questions about sex, even some you might not have thought of yet. Download the GSMC Sex Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you can find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Hello and welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson. I am talking about the process of breakups. So, one of the reasons people have a difficulty breaking up, and it's not just because the relationship is something they want to keep, or the feelings about the relationship when it was working well. But, I mean, think about this. When the relationship status changes, if you can imagine the timeline of when you first got together and there was all this enthusiasm about having a relationship, and thinking about now. Through that, there is a routine that's developed, and we get comfortable with that. There also happens to be a bit of nostalgia, because when you find a relationship that you want to invest in, then you want to feel like you always want to invest in that relationship. And when that unravels, there's that part of us, there's that optimist in us. And I'm glad that optimistic part exists, because if it didn't exist, then how would we get through the rough times? And for some of us, it may seem as though this is just a rough time. This is just a rough period. But if the other person doesn't wants to stay in the connection, then the reality is either there's some sort of negotiation that has to happen, or it's not going to work. And on the breakup part of this, when you have to come to the place of understanding that the other person does not want to be in this relationship with you, you have to understand yourself and why you still feel this strong compulsion to want to be in it. Why are you so compelled to be here? And for the person that doesn't want to be in the relationship, and the person is trying, and the other one's trying to hang on to you, here's part of what's happening. Clearly, there's a lot of emotion there, and then this is changing, and some people don't do well with that change. You know, they've invested a lot. It's really difficult to walk away from something when you had an idea of, let's say, there's so much unfinished business. There are things that you may have planned for, things that you wanted to do with that partner, and they envision it happening. They envision that happening, and now it can't. That is very hard to let go of. It's very hard to think, wow, now this will never happen if we don't have our relationship, if we don't have our union to make that happen. And that hurts. That hurts on a very deep level. And that's why, the other person is trying to stay in the relationship. So if you're the one that wants to leave and you're trying to understand, why is this person hanging on? And well, that's part of what's going on with them. They have this connection. And, there are those that they get up and they realize that they've screwed up. So now they're going to try their hardest to keep you in that union, because they realize they've screwed up, but you've gone past the point of wanting to stay in it. Remember, I'm discussing the process of breaking up. But it does hit all of us at some point when we want to stay in this union, that there's the nostalgia that's happening because we had all of these hopes, and that's going to end. There is so much having the unfinished business really makes it hard to leave a relationship. For some people, the fact that there is so much unfinished business is the reason they're leaving, because you've got, and I'll use this example, you got the one person that stays on the couch, won't get up, won't do anything, and the other person in the relationship has just been waiting for them to get off the couch and get busy and finish. And the couch is a metaphor. It could be anything in the relationship that the person just drags their feet on and doesn't get active to help be part of the process. And the fact that people have differences is not the problem. I think that's actually part of the beauty of a relationship, and it's finding the workarounds, which is what makes your connection unique. That's part of the beauty of relationships. Now, it's a challenge when you have huge gaps that you have to find the bridge, and because you got to have more than just physical chemistry to make a relationship, especially one that's going to last and help you grow as a person. But for the experience of those who feel like, well, we have to be a lot alike, and there's something to be said for people that have similarities. I am not discounting that one iota, because there are things that you really have to gel on, and it really has to depend on your personality too. Some people have to be really alike to feel really connected to somebody. And other people, like I say, different strokes for different folks. Sometimes they like people who's opposite. So if you have a person that's really outgoing and the person who's really introverted likes to be with the outgoing person because they seem, wow, that person has a lot of charisma and I feel alive. Another thing about relationships is, how another person feels around you, how they feel when they are in your presence. And if they feel good when they're in your presence, well, that makes them want to be around you more. And it's an interesting irony. People who are very self-focused think that it's all about them. And if you really want to be attractive to someone, make them feel good in your presence, and you have a captive person. But we're talking about breakups and discussing what that process is like, understanding the other person. If you're the one who doesn't want the relationship, and if you are the person who wants the relationship, understanding that other person. I try to give both sides of this. So wherever you're at in this process, if you're the person that's leaving and you're trying to understand why that other person's still hanging on, they don't want to let go. Well, again, it's the nostalgia. It's the unfinished business that makes them want to hang in there, and they feel if we have just another good experience, it'll make you want to stay also. And then there's a process of, if you're the person that's being left, trying to understand why that other person wants to leave, and they have a different idea about what they want for themselves, and you don't fit in the picture. Now that part can be very, very hard to handle, because it certainly happens to feel like rejection. And sometimes that's exactly what it is. It's rejection. Other times, and I personally have experienced this, it was a person who just did not want to be in a relationship at all. And I know sometimes that can be really, really hard to fathom, because we figure that they just don't want me. Or let me put it this way, that other person, she didn't want me. It couldn't possibly be that I'm boring or something like that. It's just that she didn't want me. Well, in the case of this analogy, it wasn't about me being a boring person. It was just really about her not wanting to be in a relationship. She just wasn't in that place. And you have to get over the compulsion of trying to talk people out of their mindset, because it really boils down to you having to understand where that other person is that wants to leave. And that can be a very hard thing to try to do in that moment when you're trying to hold on to the relationship, when you're really doing your best sales pitch to say, wow, you should stay in this relationship, and they are wanting to not be in it. That's really hard. Again, that's another part of the process of breaking up that I'm going to talk about a little bit. I'll take a break now and be right back after this. Stay tuned.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hello, and we're back. I'm John Johnson, hosting the Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm talking about breakups. I generally talk about relationships in the form of if things aren't going well, then you have to improve on your communication, and that usually will bridge a lot of the gaps. Well, in this part of the process of breakups, communication is still very, very important. And I say that because you want to get information as to what's happening to the other person and their feelings, why they're here. And now you may not be able to get that in that first conversation. So with that, I'm saying sometimes people don't always know how to describe what they feel. They just feel something, and they may struggle with coming up with the right words to explain it. So as a listener, you may wonder what they really mean when they're saying something. So just understand that the process being very emotional, people don't always have the words right there at their fingertips or right on the tip of their tongue. Excuse the other reference. Because they're in the moment. And I don't presume that people are trying to craft an exit strategy. When you're having conversations like this, it is difficult for both people, the one that may want to stay in the relationship, and I'm focusing on that part right at the moment because that quite often is where most of the conflicts come from. You have one that wants to stay and one that wants to leave, or one that wants to keep the relationship and another one that wants to leave it. Trying to deal with that transition of the letting go part, because one of them already has. Now, convincing people to stay in a relationship when there seems to be a lot of conflict is going to take quite a sales pitch to do that. Because if you would ask, why would someone want to stay in a connection where there's a lot of conflict? Now, I'm not talking about just having differences of opinion. I'm talking about conflict in and of itself, where there's arguments and there's no resolution. Or maybe said differently, where there's disagreements and there isn't a resolution about what to do about it. Because the fact of having a disagreement in and of itself isn't a bad thing. I think it's how you handle those things is really what strikes you as the quality of the relationship. And if you know how to resolve things, then those are good tools to have in your toolbox. If you're someone who isn't good at that part, well, that's something that you might, if you're a quick study, then great. You're probably good at problem resolving. But if you're not, then it's something that you're going to want to have, because I can tell you, it's not about what you do when you're happy. It's about how you handle conflict. And that's going to say a lot about you. for where I was going with this was in dealing with the breakdown of communication, which may have brought us to this. This is another place where the communication skills are going to matter, and it's the listening part. So when you ask a question, and I mean ask an authentic question, why do you want to end the relationship? And then listen to what they have to say. If it means writing things down and explain that you're not writing things down because this is something that's going to come back at them, but that you want to be able to keep this straight. And after some discussion, it may open the door to really having a greater understanding of not only the other person, but of yourself, about the expectations that maybe have been unmet, which brought you to this point. It may give you an opportunity for clarification. And, something to just kind of think about from time to time. Some people don't know how to make a point unless they threaten to end the relationship. Now, that's unfortunate because that tends to land more on the real dramatic side. You would like to think that you develop communication skills where we don't have to wait till there's a threat of ending the relationship to get people interested in being in conversation. And I wasn't initially talking about that in terms of the breakup because that is sort of, that's sort of like a false ending. That's not really what that's about. That's really about trying to get somebody to the conversation table to talk about something. I'm going to threaten to leave you kind of thing. So that's a little bit different because when I'm talking about breaking up, I'm talking about people actually ending the emotional arc that you go through, the surprise, the attempt to want to hold the relationship together, and then, the acceptance part of that. Now, the acceptance is always a challenge because for those who go into a relationship with the idea that it's going to work, and then they are now faced with the other person's feelings that they don't want to be in this, and whether you feel a bit humiliated because you're feeling rejected, I think that's a valid to feel rejected. I mean, that hurts. So what do you do with that? Well, this is a time when I think pulling out a pen and paper and writing your feelings down or dictating them into, some sort of device where you can record them is a good idea. That way you can help get some of these things off your mind. And if you want to go back and listen to it or read it, it's there. Also, this is another one of those good times where in life, talking to someone who can be objective about what you're experiencing. This would be a counselor, this would be a pastor, a minister, someone who is coached at handling people and their emotions when they're in these very raw places. I think that's critical. That's something that should also be in your toolbox. That is the willingness to understand where you're at, that you're feeling hurt, you're feeling a loss, you're grieving, and you want to process that in a healthy way. You can talk to your physician, your doctor, if you can get in to see your doctor. Some people are okay with taking medications if it's a real stressful breakup for you. Sometimes that's really helpful to get you over the hump. Again, therapists deal with this kind of thing all the time. And if you have access to someone like that who can help you with the process, then do so. If there's another trusted friend, someone who's good at listening, because maybe that's all you need to get through the process. But know that it hurts. Sometimes that is a part of the love. It's having to learn how to let go, or having to let go. And if you're the person who is, made the choice to leave the relationship because it just wasn't working out for you, and, it's hard for you too. I know you don't want to feel like you are disappointing someone or leaving somebody, sitting there hurt and crying, and that's all really, really tough stuff. I think it underscores the fact that there's a real a love there, and having to deal with the loss, that breakup really affects the both of you. I have to underscore that, loving someone isn't always easy, and neither are breakups. I think for the process itself, especially when you have these breakups where one person wants it and the other person does not want to be in the relationship, there's just so much, because you're pulling in opposite directions. So that's what hurts. I didn't have to mention a lot about those relationships in which people have agreed to end the relationship based on they feel like their needs aren't being met, but they do it in a different way. That hurts too. Having to come to that place can definitely take an emotional toll on you. You might cry together and have, help each other get through this in a way that really reflects how there is a lot of love between the two of you, but maybe the relationship itself isn't the one that works for you. And there is that. And if you've never thought of that as a possibility, believe me, that is there. And there are lots of people out there who have agreed that the relationship isn't something that will work, but that they can still be friends in some capacity, maybe not right now. And that's realistic, because everybody's process and everybody's timeline is a little different. To think that maybe they can come back at another time and maybe have a conversation about other things, not the relationship, but a different kind of conversation about things a little more neutral. But again, it's part of life. The process of breaking up, like I said, can be very, very gut-wrenching. And when you've invested your heart, your mind, your body, your soul into being with someone and it doesn't work out, just know for yourself and that other person that it is difficult. It really is. And I wouldn't want anyone else to hurt any more than they already do when they have to come to that place and be in that conversation. It takes a lot of courage to be there. And being there for yourself is going to be hard. Being there for someone else, that is that other person, if they happen to be the one who sort of relied on you for a lot of emotional support, there may be something like that. That may be hard to do. And if you can't do it, you've got to call it. You got to say, hey, I'm just not available to that. It's way too hard for me too. But make that known. Share your feelings. Let them know that they are loved. Maybe the relationship isn't itself that's something that's going to work, but that you do care about them, you do love them, but we just need to go separate ways. I'm John Johnson. I'm talking about the process of breakups. I want to thank you for listening.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.